Hey, Richard. Hey, Susan. Thank you so much for making yourself available. It's a treat for me to have you both on. And I'm going to have the links to Susan Kokinda's work at Promethean Action. You've got to subscribe and follow them and listen to their weekly broadcast and become a member and get their free email. And then, of course, you, Richard, I'll have your links because you are the author of How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. Fabulous history book. Really great for people who don't like history because it's so well written.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Any of you want to say just anything? Just hello. Let's get going.
Hi, Susan.
Well, hi, Richard. And I want to say I reread your book over the weekend just to sort of refresh myself. And it really is, I think, a very important piece of history which has manifold current implications. So I just want to put that out there when we start.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes. How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. And Richard, you have a new book coming out?
Yes, it's coming out imminently, and it's called Who Killed Lincoln? The Case Against England. I think the title speaks for itself.
Okay. So
well, Richard, I'm not sure you've seen, but we do have an ebook on our website entitled It is the British Who Murder Our Presidents.
I did see that. I was very excited to see that, and I haven't gotten it yet, but I intend to read it. It's a subject dear to my heart.
Because we extend it from Lincoln to McKinley to Kennedy, and then not murdered, but politically attempted murder, Trump.
And this would be reference to Russiagate?
Yes.
Okay. But the English, and speaking as a Briton myself, we are the allies to the United States, and we are the United States poodle, and we do the US's bidding like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan and everything. I know because the BBC told me so, and the Guardian. So,
well, the BBC's taking some hits from Trump just about now. I was a little surprised because he's usually so cordial towards the British. He almost never says anything negative about them or to them, but he hit the BBC very hard, and he even questioned whether Britain was a good ally or any ally at all, if I understood his social media post correctly.
Yeah.
Very unusual for him. Out of character, I'd say.
Well, given what the BBC did on at least two known occasions where they doctored his speeches in such a way that completely distort what he said, to make him out as a violent insurrectionist when he was actually saying the very opposite. So it's understandable. Plus, he's always railed against the fake media in the United States. And then I think there's more and more emerging, and perhaps, Susan, you want to come in terms of the nefarious role of perfidious Albion in global politics, because it's something that Dmitriev and Putin and Lavrov regularly point to. And I think it's becoming more apparent with how the European Union and the UK are completely willing to keep sending young, Slavs on the steppes of Ukraine to kill other Slavs.
Well, I think this actually gets directly to Richard's work, because what we've had for the past 100 years plus is a complete whitewashing of who the actual imperial force in the world is and who the enemy is. The emergence of communism was one of the isms which the British gave us. They also gave us fascism. They've also given us Islamic fundamentalism. They've also given us Zionism. I'm sure how about Christian fundamentalism? You have all of these isms which have emerged to obscure what the real fight is, because the real fight since the time of the American Revolution is sovereign nations acting on behalf of their citizens. And I always take pains to add that it's based on an image of man. The American Revolution is based on the idea of man in the image of the Creator. We're above the animals. We have a capacity that nobody else has. We can discover new physical principles. We can change our relationship to nature. That's what it is to be human, to be creative. The imperial system is based on the idea that you're no better than an animal. And we're going to just figure out more sophisticated ways to manipulate you. And as we get into the 21st century, they've gotten extremely sophisticated. But the fight in the world, really since the time of the American Revolution, has been between the idea of a sovereign republic with that idea of man versus the idea of empire, which of course goes back before the British. But in this time frame, since 1776, the British Empire has actually continued to be the centerpiece of the operations, the attempts to crush national sovereignty, and I would say actually crush humanity. So, for over 100 years, we've lost that. And I think what Richard has done with his book in terms of showing how one of those isms, namely communism, although you imply a few other things in there as well, how communism was totally created by the British, is absolutely vital to people being able to see clearly where we are in the world and why Trump is such a revolutionary figure.
Richard?
Well, I agree with that. To some extent, maybe I'm a little like Trump in the sense that I'm not so inclined to. I try not to beat up the British too hard. I try to be a little more focused on the fact they do have good points after all. And I know Susan and all the the people from the Larouchian tradition have a tendency to focus on there being sort of the anti-civilization, and that may actually be true. I'm not sufficiently learned in philosophy and all these other intellectual byways to judge. But my take on the British isn't so much that they're deliberately trying to degrade the human race or make things worse, although it's quite possible that they may be. But I'm just more trying to see some kind of continuity between the Pax Britannica, as it's presented to us in the history books, and the Pax Americana, in which we're supposedly living now. And I'm not sure where the one ended and the next began. So what I've more or less settled on at this point, what I think I understand, is that largely through the machinations of the so-called Roundtable movement and other allied movements surrounding that the British formed a plan. Apparently, sometime around the 1860s, it really started congealing. That they were going to save their empire. That they saw that the Americans were going to surpass them, and they needed they had failed to destroy the United States, which they had been trying to do for 80 years after the American Revolution, and they failed finally and spectacularly to break up the U.S. in the Civil War. And at that point, they formed a plan for the survival of their own empire, which was to merge with the United States and to form essentially an Anglo-American empire, which we now have today. And where I definitely do agree with Susan, I believe this Anglo-American empire is led by the British. It was created by them. It was planned by them. It was designed by them very meticulously for the purpose of keeping the British imperial elites in control of this entire global edifice of a world government ruled by a core of power among the English-speaking peoples. So now the whole question that Susan raised of there being a British system versus an American system, I will tell you, I've written about that a little. I'm still digesting that, Susan. I get it. And it took me a long time to come around to accepting that, I have to say, because I came out of basically a libertarian background, and I was, I wasn't an extremely doctrinaire libertarian, but I felt that I was against tariffs. I was for free trade, quote unquote, free markets, and anything that had the word free attached to it, propagandistically or otherwise. So it really took me decades. And I first read about the American system in Larouchian publications, Executive Intelligence Review, various books that came out of the LaRouche organization. I encountered that material back in the early 90s, and I was very challenged by it. I was intrigued by it, but I just wasn't sure to what extent it was true. And so even now today, I've come a very long way to going more towards the LaRouchian take on the American system, and which basically, as I understand it, holds that we should have a more centralized economic control in the sense of a government setting tariffs, regulating trade, and even an industrial policy, direction from the central government as to how money and credit should be allocated to develop the country. Now, those are totally, those ideas were just totally anathema to me when I was under the influence of libertarianism, which more and more people are saying. I see on social media that libertarianism itself is a British psyop, and it may very well be. But I fear I'm getting a little too long-winded, so I'm going to get to my point in a moment in reply to Susan. That so I'm more than halfway there towards realizing that I need to be much more open-minded about the American system, and there are obviously I'm totally in support of President Trump and his tariffs, and it's obvious that not only from what's going on today with Trump, but from the whole history of our country, going back to the 1790s, from the moment we won supposedly the revolution, and then the British hit us with dumping campaigns and destroy the American economy because we didn't have the power to impose tariffs from the central government. So all of American history shows more and more that this idea of the American system was the right idea. The reason I'm still hesitant is, it's kind of came to a head with this book that I'm writing now about the Civil War. And I mentioned it before, Who Killed Lincoln? The Case Against England. And of course, Abraham Lincoln was very expressly in favor of the American system. And so that all seems very logical and very consistent, let's say, with the LaRouchian position. But what I have to say, I can't accept yet. I'm teachable, but I can't accept yet that Jackson was not the patriot. Andrew Jackson was not the patriot that we were brought up to think he was. And one of the things I came into contact with while doing this present book was that there was well, certainly with the South Carolina, when they did their nullification campaign in the 1830s, Jackson stopped them. He was although he was known as pro-South and states' rights and all that, his loyalty to the United States of America as a country came first. I think that's my interpretation. And he put down this nullification movement, which seems to have been the first attempt to create a North-South civil war. And Lincoln himself seems to have admired Jackson in the sense that during the Maryland crisis, as the Civil War was getting underway, and Lincoln had to make some hard decisions because the governor of Maryland was wishy-washy. He couldn't decide if he was going to go with the North or the South. And one of the things Lincoln said during that crisis was it was suggested to him that maybe they should let the governor alone. And he was saying, don't send federal troops through Maryland anymore because it's causing all these Confederate sympathizers, secessionists, to get angry at me and riot and threaten violence and so forth. So he was suggesting to Lincoln to back down on that and send the federal troops around Maryland instead of through them. And Lincoln famously said, he said, there's no Washington in that. There's no Jackson in that. Meaning, I think he said there's no manhood in that as well.
Richard,
clearly, yes.
Richard, sorry. I do want to give Susan a chance to respond. And what you're saying is great, right? But I think there's many strands in there. I do want to keep it a little bit tight. And
Okay,
I do
sorry.
recommend that people should check out his book, How the British Invented Communism and Blamed It on the Jews, and your book to come, which I will be getting a
Can't
copy
wait
of.
for that.
You're in the UK, actually anywhere, get a VPN if you want to be able to access all sorts of perspectives. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think I think we can narrow this down pretty directly because look, many historical figures are mixed bags. they may do something valuable for their country at one time, and then under the influence of somebody else, they may do something absolutely disastrous. And I would say that Jackson was very much under the influence of Martin Van Buren, who was very much a British agent during most of his presidency. But the critical question, and this brings it right up to the situation today, is the issue of the American system versus the British system can also be fairly simply seen from the standpoint of national banking versus central banking. And if you want to look at the question of why we constantly are focusing on the British, not the people, not the country, not some very important historical traditions in Britain, like Shakespeare, some great scientists.
The common law tradition, which gave
to a certain degree,
came out of that.
Right. But but what you actually see is first of all, you see the birth of central banking is in Venice. When Roman imperial families left Rome, went to Venice, and established for the first time an institution where a private bank ran the finances of a government. It's not just private banks, but a private bank runs the finances of a government. And then that model moves directly from Venice to Holland, to the Dutch.
Via Constantinople, Susan. I think they went to Constantinople for the trade.
That part I don't know, so I'm not going to stick my neck out. What I know is that the Venetian central banking system was directly imported to the Dutch central bank, and then that hopped the channel with the Glorious Revolution and established central banking in Britain. And that one of the critical aspects of what we are constantly focusing on as British imperialism is the spread of this central banking system throughout the world. Whereas in the United States, we were the first country to establish something different, namely national banking. And of course, this is another one of the great rewritings of history, that Alexander Hamilton created a central bank, and it's no different than the Federal Reserve. And nothing could be further from the truth. Because the essence of a national banking system, as opposed to a central banking system, is what's its purpose? The purpose of a national banking system is to foster what is the true wealth of a nation, not what Adam Smith says it is, but what Alexander Hamilton says. The wealth of a nation is not its gold or its silver or its raw materials or its land, but it's the productive powers of labor, which takes you right back to Abraham Lincoln, because Lincoln was very clear. Labor is primary. Because human wealth comes from the human mind. I mean, we all have the same raw materials out there that we can, fool around with. It's what does the mind do to discover new universal principles, to discover things which increase our power over nature, electricity. Or we can go back to the Bronze Age, using fire to smelt a new kind of substance, namely bronze, which gave you greater capacity in terms of, all sorts of things, agriculture. But it's always this intervention of the human mind to discover new principles, to increase our power over nature. The whole purpose of the American system and national banking is, how do you do that? It's not focused on structures or this, that, or the other thing. It's focused on how do you increase that actual productive power of labor. The British system, the imperial system, is based on control of money and controlling the world by controlling money. And for the past, obviously there are other sub-headquarters for what we call the British system, but the City of London still remains first among many in that. Obviously you have Switzerland, you have New York, you have, today you could even throw in Hong Kong, Cayman Islands, other things, but you can trace most of that monetarist thinking back to this Venice, to Holland, to Britain trajectory. And then, of course, we give up national banking pretty much with the assassination of Lincoln. It lasted a little bit longer. It wasn't a national bank, but it was a national banking system. And then the final, nail in the coffin is the Federal Reserve in 1913, at which point you probably didn't have anywhere in the world that I'm aware of that actually had a national banking system. You've seen, the triumph, well, maybe today China, I'm not sure. But you've basically seen the triumph of central banking throughout the course of this last, really increasingly since the assassination of Lincoln and the assassination of McKinley. So that's our that I think is another window into the American versus the British side of things in terms of these kinds of institutions.
And just on that, Susan, the central banking system, the countries that are not part of the Western central banking system, the so-called axis of evil, North Korea, Russia, China, Iran, and formerly Syria and Libya. So then, what they got to do is destroy those countries through military means, so the banksters can come in. And just listening and thinking about the American system of political economy, it sounds remarkably like the sort of social democratic model that was in place even in Britain in the 50s and 60s and the 70s, that got demolished by Thatcher, I think, in the late 1980s, because we had manufacturing in Britain. There were protections against foreign entities coming in and grabbing everything. Anyway, just like
yeah, no, I think if you look at the history of the last 100 years, I mean, it really wasn't until 71, taking the dollar off the gold reserve standard, then with the various other financial machinations and so on, but then sort of the unleashing of the free trade system, that you created a world in which everybody had to bow down to this liberal free trade system, frankly, until Donald Trump came along.
Yes. And I remember reading a book in the late 80s, which was talking about all these different countries around the world that were self-sufficient in the matter of food, but no longer. And three come to mind. Zimbabwe was self-sufficient in food production, didn't need to import any food. Pakistan had food that it could export. It was able to feed its own people. Albania was able to feed its own people. And that's no longer the case for these three countries. In fact, there's probably very few countries that can still feed themselves. Russia, of course, can.
Did them a favor,
they're going to destroy that, right? and I think what it points to, Susan, and Richard, you can comment on this, is how hell-bent the British, and we're talking about the British imperial elites, the owners of the City of London, the City of London partners, are hell-bent on destroying Trump because he's a threat to their rapacious free market globalist imperialism. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I certainly agree with that. I wanted to ask Susan, so when you draw a distinction, Susan, between a national bank and a central bank, I think what you're saying is the national bank is run by the government itself, whereas the central bank is run by the banking oligarchy, that it's private.
Right.
And that is the key distinction that you're making, yes?
And it has, I mean, the national bank had embedded in the legislation, which did keep it under the control of the Congress, it had a mission. And the mission was to act for increasing, again, the productivity of the country. So it has an intention, which is to actually increase the manufacturing and scientific and other base of the country. You know, the central banks they're all based on this idea that it's just a question of managing money, you know. And of course, if you're only in the world of managing money, and money is your only metric, let me just take a step back. It really is the question of the metric. What is it you're trying to increase? In under the American system, you're trying to increase the physical economic output of your country. You're trying to increase lifting up the standard of living of your population. Under a monetary system, you're trying to increase the amount of monetary profit you have. Mm-hmm. And we've seen how that works. If you increase the money, if that's your only metric, well, then free trade is just a super duper good idea because people are going to be able to make bigger profits.
So do you see Trump today trying to address that issue? I mean, does he have a plan for after the Fed goes away?
You know, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself or ahead of Donald Trump, but what I see is I think this administration knows that they know what they're up against. If you look especially at people like J.D. Vance, he just gave an incredible interview to Breitbart, where he came right out and he said, this is a new Republican Party and it's based on labor. You know, it's not the old Republican Party of Wall Street. So he's conscious of it. Even Scott Bessent, you know, who comes from the world of finance, has said the same thing. You know, the pendulism. I mean, he does. We have at Promethean Action, we have a half-page flyer that says Main Street, not Wall Street, and goes through this new Republican Party. Bessent doesn't go quite that far, but he says Wall Street has benefited for the past 30 years. It's time for Main Street to catch up. You know, so those are the terms that he puts it in. So I think they do understand that. I think if you look at the emphasis they have on increasing the skill level of the American workforce, they have a very aggressive skilled trades apprenticeship program where they want to train 1 million skilled trades people per year in the United States. That's just amazing, in terms of recognizing that this is where that wealth actually comes from increasing your manufacturing and the skill levels of your population. I think they understand that. Now, how does that play out in terms of getting rid of the Fed? I think we're a ways away from that. I think if some people could snap their finger, maybe they'd do it. But I always make 2 points. First of all, to do that, you're going to have Congress come along with you. And from what I know of the US Congress, we're at least 2 to 3 election cycles away from that happening, if we're even that close, because I know the quality of most people running for office right now. So you'd have to have a Congress that was, has evolved beyond the Congress that we currently have. And you also have to know, what does national banking look like in the 21st century? Abraham Lincoln did not cookie cutter Alexander Hamilton's National Bank. He did not have a single institution. He generated credit through a national banking system. So it was different under Lincoln. Roosevelt kind of played around a little bit with it. He used the discount window of the Fed as a way to get credit out to the productive economy. And we had the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which was an important institution. When you look at the Trump administration, what I see is they're taking the beginning steps to set up a few parallel institutions. They've played around with the idea of a sovereign wealth fund, and then they kind of backed off and they said, well, maybe there's some entities inside our government that we could already use in a quasi-national banking way, because what you're looking at is institutions that can just start to get credit into the productive sector. That's not national banking, but it's sort of a halfway, because national banking is the nation generates its credit through some kind of national bank or national banking institution. And instead of it going to the major money center banks like the Federal Reserve does today, you make sure there's some way to channel it into the real economy, so that you're somebody who wants to build a new factory, somebody who wants to, build a small modular nuclear reactors. Somebody who wants to use something productive is going to have access to credit, which you have not had largely, especially in the past 20, 30 years, where everything has been financialized. The money goes to where you can make a monetary profit. The money does not go to where you can actually improve your economy.
And Richard, just to answer your question, Tom Luongo, in his work, I can't reproduce what Tom says, but he's pointers to certain steps that Trump and his team are taking that lead in that direction, including the reevaluation of gold, and also, Tom says, Bitcoin as a way of shoring up the value of the dollar. And then also how the Genius Act or the Clarity Act is going to do something with stable coins, that they're going to be backed by US treasuries in order to increase the liquidity and the value of the dollar, so that there is money available to boost productive capacity. Now, to better understand it, you need to listen to Tom's podcast, because it's just so makes the room spin. But I listen politely and try and work it out.
No, but I think Trump and his team, and especially his team, people like Bessent and Lutnick and JD, because he comes from the world of finance too. I mean, JD's a pretty interesting person, comes from a very poor blue collar background via, the world of finance. How they're going to apply this, and how quickly you can transit from a central banking system to a national banking system. Again, these are not things that I would feel any confidence in forecasting, but I think that's their intention.
Well, I see a lot of positivity from you and Barbara Boyd and Tom Luongo, from basically from all the people who sort of surround and participate in Crypto Rich's podcast.
My new channel, Crypto Rich Politics, is going gangbusters. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're definitely sort of gathering a group of people around you who are of a certain mind, and it's very exciting to see. And I'm intrigued by how positive all of you are that Trump is somehow going to end this British system we're talking about, and I want to believe it. It's so hard. It's so hard to read Trump himself, though, and of course that's part of his genius and his diplomacy and his art of the deal, because he goes to England like his last trip, and he was just so respectful and positive towards the British, and in no way seemingly trying to pick a fight with them, and they didn't reciprocate at all. They were very nasty to him in certain ways, and I think that shows the power of the man. That is how a powerful person deals with weaker people, is by not rising to their provocations and not sinking to their pettiness. And I have complete confidence that Trump does have a plan for dealing with this very issue, but it's so hard for me to see the details. It's hard for me to share the confidence that I hear from people like you, Susan, just because I'm just not seeing the details.
Rich, if I can come in on this, and I don't have the skill and the insight that Susan brings, or Tom brings, or Alex Craner, or Ian Burlingame, or Blaine Hall, or any of these these incredible, Barbara Boyd, incredibly intelligent people who are just so versed in this discourse, in this type of analysis. I know from myself as a child protection social worker, and if I apply that, I've never ever seen abuse happen. I've never seen it happen. But what I see are pointers and indicators, little red flags. So then what I can see with Trump, not that he's being abusive, but the way that he operates, there's certain little red flags and pointers that says that he's going in a certain direction. And then from listening to Susan and Barbara and Tom and all the others, I'm getting tuned to, well, what are those? And the other way that I look at it is the way a master plays. Because he's been incredibly successful in his life. Very few presidents have done one term, not been elected, and then come back to win a second term. Just to win one term takes something. Mm-hmm. And then to win one term with all these forces allied against you, out to destroy you and kill you, and then still to endure that term, lose through fraud, I suspect. Well, I'm pretty clear, right? And then come back anyway against all those previous forces that defeated you. That really takes something, takes some real skill. And I have made the analogy to Muhammad Ali and his first fight with Sonny Liston. Mm. Sonny Liston at the time was the most feared boxer, and people really, really thought that this 18-year-old kid, or however old he was going to get killed by Sonny Liston. And what Muhammad Ali did, he played like a crazy man, because he'd worked out that Liston was terrified of people who were crazy. Mm. And Muhammad Ali knew just what to do. He kept his distance for 7 rounds away from from Sonny Liston. Kept his distance, exhausted Liston, and then knocked him out. Mm-hmm. Well, he didn't knock him out, but Liston threw in the towel. So, so if I'm using that as a metaphor, Trump is incredibly skilled at playing people, and I think it was apparent in his meeting with Mamdani. And it's really funny how the Democratic supportive media have played that somehow Mamdani has got one better over Trump.
Yeah,
that's
crazy.
So funny. Like Mamdani's more powerful than Trump, mm-hmm. More powerful than Putin and Xi as well, I bet. Right? Really. So, and it was from what you said that Trump's really, really gracious. He was mm-hmm. really gracious with Mamdani. It's okay. Just say yes. It's easier. Skin off my.
And there was one really telling thing in that meeting, which again, I think it gets to the fact that people make a mistake if they think Trump is the kind of Republican we've seen in the past 40 or 50 years, because he's really not. He's an American system president. The Democratic Party has completely destroyed itself. We had efforts to try and save the Democratic Party in the past and gave up on that at a certain point. But Trump is simply reviving the American system. So he's not so much a, quote, Republican. So that picture they took in front of the portrait of Franklin Roosevelt, Mamdani pointed out and said, I'd like to have my picture taken there. But Trump made the point. He had said this previously in a cabinet meeting. I found this picture in the basement, and I made sure that it was reframed. And I was put it up there. If you pay close attention to Trump, and recognize there's certain things that you don't take at face value. That, you know, where he's throwing his enemies off balance, and the Muhammad Ali, approach a certain time. But if you pay close attention to him, he's often telling you exactly what he means. And I remember the last NATO meeting that Trump was at, and when he said this at first, I sat there and scratched my head, and then I said, "Oh no, I know what he's saying." He's saying, "I look around this table, and I see leaders who are proud of their nations and want their nations to be better." Now, who are the people at this table? Macron, Merz, Starmer. They don't want their nations to be better. They're all tools of the elites. But he's saying, "No, this is what I want for your nations. I want your nations to be nations. And that's what I'm praising." So a lot of times when he praises people, and you can look at it with the Mamdani thing as well, he genuinely wants New York to be saved. And if Mamdani does anything that actually will do that, he's going to do something to help him. I mean, he also made very clear we may have different methods in terms of getting to the same place, but affordable housing. You can't afford to live. You can't afford to live in New York. That's why Mamdani won. You just can't afford to live there. And your average working class person can't make it. It's insane because everything has been financialized since, 1971. Everything is just an income stream for this huge financial parasite. You see the increase in financialization doing this, and you see the collapse of manufacturing doing that. We were at a point where it was no longer sustainable. That's when nations either are destroyed, or if you're an empire, you go find some other place to loot.